We do events and then we just tick that off and we go, everything went okay. And so what I'm trying to do for the remainder of this year is try and open up a conversation about, well, what does it actually all mean? What's the purpose of all these events? And for me, they have to be about promoting reconciliation and peace building. And by that, I sort of mean that we need to make sure that there's different perspectives are heard, different views are brought forward, and that new learning can enable us to look at those aspects of our history which could be seen as being divisive as actually something that can be seen as being shared. Personally, it means it's something that's steeped in where we are today in terms of this island and politics and issues around identity and culture and all those sorts of things. It also means a lot of work because I'm involved in the Belfast City Council's Decade of Centenaries programme, and probably since 2011 we have been navigating our way through all of the commemorations that have been going on, starting with the Balmoral Review in May 2011, then leading up to the Ulster Covenant and all of the events and activities around that. 2016 was always going to be a significant year in terms of the whole area of commemoration, so I suppose we've tried to put a lot of work into how we would prepare for that. So working with a political organisation, it has been a fantastic process. And back in November 2014, we took a bunch of councillors from different political parties down to Dublin to look at how things were shaping up in terms of the commemorations down there. And brought them to the Garden of Remembrance, and following the Queen and the President laying a wreath there in 2011, it was a fantastic experience to look at commemoration in light of that, in a space like that. We also went to Glasnevin, where they've done a lot of outreach to particularly the Unionist and Loyalist community up here. We also went to the GPO and Island Bridge. So we tried to get a nice balance for people from the different political parties here to go and see something that might sort of broaden our view as to how we could do things here in Belfast. It's a little bit different in Belfast because you've got probably a bit more animation around the politics and the culture and the identity and the history and all those sorts of things. So we asked the councillors how they would like us to proceed in terms of how we would undertake the commemorations for 1916. And what they told us was that they wanted us to focus on a strong Belfast connection. They wanted us to look at the human stories and particularly look at those lost lives. They were sort of themes that could bring it all together in terms of us and Belfast. So we developed a programme of events and a civic programme and a large exhibition which is down in the City Hall until the end of August, and we called it Reflections on 1916. And in it we have a strong Belfast connection with what happened in the Easter Rising, very strong Belfast connection with the Somme, but also as well other events from 1916 that opened my eyes in terms of what happened and what was going on, like the Battle of Jutland, huge significance for Belfast. Winifred Carney and George McBride. We actually got a guy from America who donated their original medals that they were awarded for service in the 1916 Rising War of Independence and Battle of the Somme in the First World War to us, which are on display at the moment down there as well. A story that is fantastic and really embodies, I suppose, what we're trying to do in terms of our Decade of Centenaries programme, which ultimately is to try and promote awareness of our shared history and use that to build good relations. So I suppose for me 2016 means so much. I've been up here 20 years working in sort of community relations, peace and reconciliation, and so to be involved at the heart of this in such a significant year is fantastic. We'd also have quite a strong connection with working class loyalist communities across the city from the last 10 years working for the City Council, and I'm very aware as to how important the Somme is for them. And I suppose you guys coming up here today is really important because the Somme may not be talked about much in the south, but up here it's very, very significant. And from an all-island perspective, I'm really keen that the Somme becomes part of the overall narrative as to what 1916 means to the island. And it needs to be integral in that. And it's not just for the 36th Ulster Division, the 16th Irish and the Connacht Rangers, which have a very, very strong Catholic nationalist heritage as well, which has probably sometimes been overlooked throughout the course of our history, but only really re-emerging since the advance of the peace process and that broad awareness. So there's lots of significance there for me personally and also professionally, and this year has been fantastic so far. again, speaking personally, I think what we decided to do back in 2011 was to try and look at how we could navigate our way through this. So we put together a series of principles, and I know lots of other organisations talk about principles, but we had a cross-party group of councillors that agreed back then, this is how we need to do things. And everything that we've done, even through funding that we have given to community organisations, they have had to adhere to those principles. And those principles have enabled us to do events that I suppose factually accurate, but also opening them up to different perspectives and different narratives. One of the most fantastic ones I was at was a few years ago, where there was a 100th anniversary commemoration event on the formation of the Young Citizen Volunteers. And I didn't know much about it other than the flags I saw on the lampposts. But it was a middle-class organisation. It was basically to train boys to become men. And Catholics were involved in it as well. But I didn't know any of this. But one of the fascinating things about the event was a guy, a historian, who came along and gave a nationalist perspective of the YCV from then, and also a perspective from now. And it was very, very challenging to all of those different persuasions that were sitting in the room. And that sort of brought home to me how the potential that all of these events have to open up people's perspectives. And I suppose my issue with a lot of it has been around, we do events and then we just tick that off and we go, everything went okay. And so what I'm trying to do for the remainder of this year is try and open up a conversation about, well, what does it actually all mean? What's the purpose of all these events? And for me, they have to be about promoting reconciliation and peace building. And by that, I sort of mean that we need to make sure that there's different perspectives are heard, different views are brought forward, and that new learning can enable us to look at those aspects of our history which could be seen as being divisive as actually something that can be seen as being shared. So that, the Covenant is part of my history. The Battle of the Somme is part of Irish history, part of British history. The Easter Rising had huge implications for what happened afterwards in terms of why this island is partitioned, why we have people struggling to, I suppose, project their culture and heritage and identity in ways that sometimes become more overt than normal. So I'm hoping that through all of the commemorations that are going on from a wide variety of different organisations, particularly within the community sector, that we can open up these events to different viewpoints with a view to using them to promote reconciliation and greater understanding of different traditions and identities. Over the course of probably the last 4 years, as this whole decade of centenaries has proceeded, where people have enabled commemorations that maybe 10, 15 years ago may not have been able to happen in such a peaceful environment. That has been very positive, particularly on the streets of Belfast. And I've also seen people go the extra mile to go to events that maybe they wouldn't particularly have gone to maybe 10, 15 years ago. So I've seen people coming away from events like that saying, I've learned something new. And I've also seen people go to events who have never been to anything like this before, particularly people, older people. I've seen a lot of older people, and by that I mean people in their 60s and 70s maybe, people who have time to go to events that are going along to them, and eyes being opened and having a fantastic experience and learning a lot. So that's why I suppose I'm probably a bit more positive about it all. As well as the fact that we have a feedback station in our exhibition down the City Hall, and I have literally a pile of cards that sits about that high on my desk. And what people have said in it is, it's fantastic that in the city of Belfast we can have an exhibition that has everything that happened in 1916 in the one place. And people find that, I suppose, they find that as a sign of progress and a mature approach to maybe where things are at now politically. So going forward, you'd like to think that we can build on that. I think the positive response that the events and activities that we have put on, public events and activities that we have put on, the positive response to that has been fantastic. And that really stands out for me, that there was an approach that people were a bit wary about how is this all going to go. And rather than just jump from one event into the next, I suppose I've seen a sort of a weave through it all, that we've actually really encountered the year head on. and we have marked the various different events along the way, but it has been part of a collective commemoration, and that has been very positive. That really stands out for me, and the response of people when they see a play or when they hear information that they have never heard before. And the other thing that's been really positive for me has been the way we have all worked together on this. The Nerve Centre have been fantastic, CRC, Heritage Lottery, a lot of the Psalm societies across Belfast, all of them have been fantastic, and the Union of Centenaries Committee, we've tried to work very, very well with them and try and support them too. So there's lots of really good stuff going forward to see what comes at us in the next 7 years. Well, what it has enabled us to do, I think, is enable communities to offer respect for other communities' commemorations. So in terms of the now, I think we've seen that over the course of the year. There's been fantastic events that have gone on within communities that have happened, and even in the upcoming Féile, there's going to be a series of lectures on the Psalm in Féile. Jason Burke is involved with that. And that's getting a bit of funding from ourselves and the council so people are, I suppose, opening their doors to different viewpoints and expressions. And I suppose through that we're hoping, people will just open up their mind a wee bit to what else is out there in the wider truth of history that is maybe not part of their truth at the moment. So in terms of community relations, I think it has enabled us to offer generosity to different communities around supporting people in the commemoration of their significant key events. It can be up and down in terms of how people feel about how their particular culture and heritage and identity is viewed, and sometimes that can maybe get in the way of creativity and interaction that can maybe create more positive engagement. So I suppose we talk about interculturalism and multiculturalism. Well, interculturalism for me is where different cultures interact with each other, as opposed to a multicultural approach where different cultures sit side by side. And I suppose I would like to think that we're moving towards an intercultural way in which people celebrate and commemorate their cultural heritage and their significant events in their calendar year. So that's a long process, because that's about trust, and it's about how people feel in terms of the security of themselves in their, I suppose, their identity and their heritage, and politics obviously plays a big part in that too. So while we have an absence of violence in that sense, I think there's work to be done in terms of how we tackle some of those issues around cultural heritage and identity, and how that's expressed in an intercultural shared community. And I think what we've shown this year is that it can happen in a positive way. So that's the big challenge for me, because that's, to me, if we have good relations within and between communities, all of the other indices around health and well-being, around quality of life, economic achievement, educational attainment, all of those things will be part of the success of the good relations process, I suppose. So we need to make sure that good relations works so that people can succeed in those other areas of life. One of the key things for me has been the success of the principles that our politicians adopted, and very keen that we continue to engage with our politicians about how we can deliver events and activities in line with those principles that have served us well thus far. We come up with a chronology up until 1925, back in 2011. So we're looking to support our politicians in delivering the programme that they've already set themselves. So I suppose more of the same, but with the learning that we've got thus far, I think we should be able to tackle some of those upcoming big key events, like, as you say, the the formation of Northern Ireland, the partition, the boundary, and all of those sorts of things, and even at a local community level thing, from the early 20s, there's maybe some big challenges there in terms of how some of those events and activities will be commemorated, but we've done okay so far, so we're sort of hopeful that we can continue in the same way over the next number of years. The other thing that has cropped up, I suppose, which is probably worth mentioning, is there's 50th anniversaries of the Troubles on their way, and I suppose a wider conversation maybe needs to happen about what we commemorate and how we commemorate things, but maybe some of the institutions that around the past and legacies may assist in doing that, but that's the sort of the unknown at the moment. So we will have to see what that brings too. I suppose my grandfather told me a story of where he was in Moore Street when the Rising broke out, and I suppose whenever I heard those stories, I was fascinated by it, and I got into Irish history. Then when I came up here, I heard another story within Irish history that I had not been exposed to. And I suppose part of what I like to do is to try and support people to tell that side of the story as well. So for me, the Ulster Covenant is very significant from the decade of centenaries. The First World War and the engagement of Britain in the First World War is a fantastic part of history as well, of Irish history. And the Battle of the Somme is I suppose, the most iconic battle for Unionists and Loyalists in Northern Ireland. And I think all of us on the island should be mindful of that. There was a huge sacrifice made and a huge loss of life that touched many, many, many families throughout Belfast and further afield. So the First World War, I think we need to be more mindful maybe of how those sort of global military events impacted upon communities here and still has a legacy today. One of the biggest parades in Northern Ireland is on the 1st of July every year through East Belfast, and that's to commemorate when the 36th Ulster Division went over the top on the 1st of July in 1916. So I suppose that's my learning from it. I need to be more open to what other communities are experiencing at this point in time in terms of commemorations as well, and because I think there is a general openness amongst everybody to hearing and learning about, I suppose, the shared history, but the different allegiances that are attached to it. I think definitely the work that Glasnevin have done over the years has had a really positive impact on all of this for us, and it was fantastic to meet with them and hear of the work that they're doing to make sure that people feel that the dead, regardless of where they're buried on the island, are honoured. One of the things I think which was important for Unionists and Loyalists around the Easter Rising was the loss of life amongst British military and police personnel that needed to be acknowledged and commemorated. And I think the Irish government did a good job in terms of that, but we were also very conscious of that as well, and we've included a lot of that in our exhibition too, which has gone down okay in terms of people's perceptions around 1916 and what we're trying to do in the City Hall there as well. So yeah, I think we've tried to get the balance right, include what people wanted included, but also in a sensitive way, in a respectful sort of way as well.